this day and age, people seem to forget that the most basic human right of all is the right to believe.
One of your students sent a text to their parents. Did this happen?
If you're asking whether I responded to a student's question, yes.
And your answer incorporated the words of Jesus.
What were you thinking, Grace?
The Thawleys are asking that you be fired, plus revocation of your teaching certificate.
How do we make this go away and not get blood on our hands?
We let the ACLU do it.
We're going to prove once and for all that God is dead.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's a scene from God's Not Dead 2. The great movie. The first one took place in a college, and this is in a high school. And Pat Boone, legendary singer, TV host, actor, number 10 all-time recording artist, according to Billboard, is with us. Don't forget to check out patboone.com and godsnotdeadthemovie.com. Hello, sir.
Hi, Steve.
It's so good to talk to you again, and I know the movie came out at the beginning of April. It's a great movie. It's an important movie, and you know, it speaks to the time in which we live. When you see that little clip that you were in, and you see the expression on that teacher's face for answering a question and daring to say Jesus and talk about it in class, and now they want her fired. I mean, that's the real world in which we live in.
And I'm afraid there are too many millions of us that don't quite realize that. Steve, they think this is a little far-fetched, but you can talk to many teachers who have been fired because they dared mention the name Jesus in a classroom, not trying to convert anybody, but answering a question like in this movie, just the historical fact that Jesus did say things that were quoted later by Martin Luther King, Reverend Martin Luther King, and by Mahatma Gandhi and others. But the question was, didn't Martin Luther King say some things that Jesus had said, like turn the other cheek and pray for those that despitefully use you? And the teacher said yes. And so then the atheistic parents of the kid who taped her remark want her fired. And when the school won't fire her because she's one of their best teachers, they call in the ACLU and this mad dog big lawyer. And of course, I want everybody to go see the movie. I don't want to tell them how it ends, right. But it ends the way it ought to.
You know, it begs the question, and I think one of the producers of the movie asked this question: if atheists, if there's not a real persecution against Christians out there, then why should atheists be offended about this, about something like that happening in a classroom, or a monument honoring our veterans, or a cross at a cemetery? Why should they be offended if there's not a real war on Christianity?
Well, there's absolutely no reason at all, because the First Amendment guarantees freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And as you know, says that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator, which is not establishing a religion. It's simply recognizing, as did Einstein and Stephen Hawking and all the great scientists, there had to be some kind of a brain or a mentality beyond ours, because all of this couldn't have happened, all the world and the cosmos as we know it, without some kind of a design. So there must have been an intelligence beyond ours that even Einstein couldn't comprehend, because the idea that perfection as we know it evolved from chaos is no scientific principle. It doesn't happen in science or in nature or anywhere else.
Right.
Chaos begets chaos. So the question is, are everybody going to have a right to speak or not? I wrote a song called Under God, answering the atheist Michael Newdow, who was insisting, and still is, on taking two words, under God, out of our Pledge of Allegiance. And I asked him on television, why are you upset by 99% of Americans wanting to say this? Because it's unconstitutional. I said, based on what? He says, the First Amendment. I said, yes, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. I said, yeah, go ahead. What's the rest of that sentence? He didn't want to say the rest of the sentence, so I said, I'll say it for you. Nor restricting the free exercise thereof. And he had no answer for that.
Well, Pat, this leads to the election, and I want to get to that in a second, because you stack the court with enough Supreme Court justices like Hillary would put on, and they will limit the First Amendment and eviscerate the Second Amendment. But I want to ask you about, the contradiction here and the hypocrisy. There's a war against Christianity, But when it comes to Muslims, you know, I played this cut earlier. Today down in Orlando, the FBI agent in charge of the case in Orlando, they released the transcripts of the 9/11 calls that the shooter made. The FBI agent said, he stood there and said, of course, the shooter does not represent Islam. He represents a perverted version of Islam. I mean, since when is it the part of the FBI to make that kind of a statement when talking about a man who just committed a terrorist act?
It's the pressure from above and the administration. That's where, and maybe even the Attorney General, who I've just learned had the reason she didn't want to turn over all those recorded calls is because they wanted to have time to change, either erase any reference he made to Allah or to change Allah to God.
They did that. We showed that earlier. Yes, in the transcripts. Absolutely.
They don't want any aspersions on Islam, but it's okay to send teachers or preachers who preach the gospel to jail. And so I must say, this president, and God bless him, the president says we're to pray for him, and I do. My prayer for the president is that God put him in the hollow of his hand for God's purposes in his life and ours. I don't know of a better prayer for anybody, but this president raised Muslim and indoctrinated by his biological father and adoptive father to think of America as a colonial oppressor and not worthy of world leadership. He went to, and he said during the campaign, the sweetest sound in his memory or his
Muslim call to prayer, yeah,
Muslim call to prayer.
Yeah.
So he was raised Muslim. He does make a perfunctory appearance at the presidential prayer breakfast, and he will come to a black funeral after one of these killings like Orlando. But he celebrates Ramadan in the White House, and so that he is, I'm afraid, more Muslim than Christian, and he is certainly more protective of anything relating to Islam than he is anything relating to Christianity.
Well, I will say, you know, you mentioned the prayer breakfast. He blasted Christianity for the Crusades and everything else. I do want to take a few phone calls. I know there are a lot of people want to have the pleasure and the honor of speaking to the great Pat Boone, so let's try to get a couple in at 1-877 Newsmax. And we go to Donna from Frederick, Maryland. Hi, Donna.
Hello, Steve, and hello, Pat. It's such a pleasure to be on with both of you.
Thank you, Donna.
You know, this situation, in particular with Orlando, it's such a travesty. And the truth with this is that the veil has been lifted. The marriage between radical Islam and the current left has now been exposed. And that brings us down to our higher calling and what we're going to do to save a nation. And there was, I guess, some news. I think it was via Dr. Savage is so, great with informing the public that someone in the military this week was reprimanded for speaking out on behalf of God.
He was carried away. He was carried away from a ceremony because he referred to God. You're absolutely right, Donna, and kudos to Michael Savage, who I think you're talking about, for bringing that up. Yeah, it's what Pat's been talking about and what I've been talking about. There is a war on Christianity, and at all costs, we prop up Islam, and it's a very dangerous thing.
You know, what I'm calling it is the Armageddon on the airwaves and in media. Armageddon is already happening. That's the battle of two gods. Allah is not Jehovah. Jehovah is not Allah. These are two concepts of God. Christian and Jewish is Jehovah. Allah is Islam. And in our Bible, God commands us to love. In fact, He's defined as love. God is love. We're even to love our enemies and to pray for those that despitefully use us. The Quran, and I have the Quran, and I've read the verses of the sword that command faithful Muslims to either kill or subjugate non-believers, and particularly Christians and Jews. Interesting, because Islam was based by Muhammad a lot on the Bible and on Christianity, taking precepts and principles from Judeo-Christian religion and incorporating them in a way into Islam. But you know, this religion, called, certainly as ISIL practices it anyway, is religion that reveres death and promotes death and rewards death and murder. Well, Christianity says pray for those, for your enemies, and do good, do as you would have them do unto you, you do unto them. I mean, these are two very, very different ideas about religion, and though they're good people who subscribe to them on both sides, and I know that there are good Muslim people who don't subscribe to those verses in the Quran that I've read,
Right.
and I can turn to the pages and show you
Yeah.
that they say that Jews and Christians are less than human.
Right, and we're all, and non-believers are infidels, and we're not considered innocent. So when they say don't kill innocents, they're not talking about us. Hey, thanks for the call, Donna. Pat, God bless you, sir. Thank you very much. The movie's God's Not Dead. Go to godsnotdeadthemovie.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.